Hey there everyone. So I've been watching some of the videos that Six Sages Gaming have been making recently, and they're good friends of mine. I actually really like those guys, so you should definitely check out their channel too. And they've been doing some budget videos and kind of decks that they're making on a budget, and I kind of thought I'd join in on it. Although I'm going to take it one step further than they have, and my deck that I'm built right here is completely rareless. Now, rares in this game are a bit funny. I'm referring to rares as heroes and legends. Now, rares in Final Fantasy for some reason are kind of the same rarity as uncommons in other games, so as far as I'm concerned, rareless means no heroes and legends. Now, I'm not going to go on and on and on because I always end up with my videos 20 to 30 minutes at a time when I'm trying to explain a deck, and I don't want them to be this long this time, so I'm just going to get straight into it. The deck I'm presenting to you today is also built around Warrior of Light, and very similarly to how Six Sages has done theirs, because I do think that if you're going for a budget, Warrior of Light is one of the strongest cards that you can play. And except my deck is built off of Earth rather than Wind, because I think that there's a lot of Earth's little tricks that can kind of support Warrior of Light really, really well and make it so that the deck isn't overly reliant on him either. Now the deck has 21 forwards, 18 backups and 11 summons. Now, going straight into water forwards, Warrior of Light is actually a really strong card on his own. He's a 4-drop 8k, which is never a bad thing, but obviously he's not there to be a primary attacker, he's there to make other guys into a primary attacker. So there's a lot of other standard units in this deck, but not everything in the deck is built around him. But you'll notice that there's certain plays with some of the standard units that go along with him that also involve other cards as well as him. That being said, it's definitely a 3-of in this deck. And then one of the best standard units I think in the game right now is actually Mime. Mime can pair up with anything to form a party, and I think party attacking is something that's very underused in the Final Fantasy TCG right now. So in order to be able to draw cards consistently, as I've gone over many, many times before, being able to draw cards consistently is never a bad thing, especially when you're doing it with a 6k first striker that, you know, it's been boosted by Warrior of Light. 7k if you've got the water booster out as well. That's pretty solid. But one of my favourite stars of this deck is actually Geomancer. Now I think this is the best standard unit in the game, because not only does it pair up with Warrior of Light really, really well, it pairs up with about 10 other cards in this deck as well. And normally I'd put this with Kefka, but I'm trying to keep rares out of this deck, or heroes and legends out of this deck, so I've decided that Serafie works really, really well, because if you grab Geomancer from it and your opponent grabs something else, then you're going to plus more out of it than they are, because when you play your Geomancer, you do your thing with it and it dies, you'll get to draw another card. Unless they grab something that draws a card, they won't get that. So it's something that works really well with that. Then you have Delita in this deck as well, which we'll get to later, who also synergizes really well with this card, and then obviously Warrior of Light does. So if you have an 8k first striker that goes toe to toe with legendary Sephiroth that can draw a card when it dies, that's pretty solid in my books. And then lastly I'm going to go with a single copy of Rare Cecil, and this is the Paladin Cecil. Mainly because I want him to stop my opponent from using things on their cards rather than mine. Things like Fairy or, you know, Titan, which are both in this deck. It's nice to know that your opponent can't do it on their guys because they just get redirected to Cecil. And it's also a way to protect Warrior of Light if you are trying to rely on him for your kill condition. With backups, I'm going to go with 3 copies of Geomancer, because both versions of Geomancer Underwater are amazing. Geomancer Water just allows you to check the top card of your deck, and if you're going to see an EX burst on being attacked, then you can do it that way, or in like near the end of your opponent's turn. Once they've tried to do something, you can check for your next turn. There's lots of things that this card can do, and it's just really, really good. And then Yaag Rosch and White Mage I think are interchangeable. I've gone for 2 copies of Yaag Rosch and 1 copy of White Mage, but in all fairness you can change them around because very, very few cards in this deck can be destroyed by Hecaton, which is a thing. You know, almost all of the backups in this deck are 2 drops or less, and the reason that I've done that is so that, you know, Hecaton isn't actually something that affects you very much. And then I've gone with 2 copies of Evoker. Now, Evoker is a funny one, and I've just done that for no reason. And Evoker's a funny one. The Japanese seem to love it, and I never liked it when I tried it, but, you know, this is meant to be a very aggressive deck, and therefore a 1-drop could actually fit that build very, very nicely. So I'm going for 3 copies of Evoker across Earth and Water, and thinking that you probably want the Water cards more, because there's a lot more 3-drops in the deck than the Earth one. However, you can easily change this around as you see fit. You do you at the end of the day. And then lastly I'm going with a single copy of Wakka, which is the water booster, because obviously having everything have 3k extra in first strike is a lot nicer than having everything have 2k extra in first strike, because, you know, say a Geomancer can now beat Sephiroth in a battle, that's nice. That's really nice. Fairly standard fare when it comes to the water summons. I've gone with 3 copies of Leviathan because it's just a simple removal spell and it's an EX burst, so it can save you in, you know, under the right circumstances. And then 2 Moogle and 2 Fairy. I really like having the combination of the two. When I've run decks before, I kind of forgot Fairy, or, well, I didn't really forget it, I just chose not to run it and ran 3 copies of Moogle instead. But nowadays I tend to run 2 Moogle and 2 Fairy, so that you have like a draw suite that kind of does different things in different ways. Going into the Earth forwards now, I've gone with kind of the biggest thing that can get buffed by Warrior of Light, which is Black Belt, which is again a 4-drop 8k guy, which next to Warrior of Light is a 10k first striking guy, and that's scary in the right hands. You know, it's just that's just a big guy. There's not a lot you can do about that. And then I'm going off with 2 Serafies rather than 3. The reason for this is because I don't think there are many targets in this deck that you'd want to pick up multiple copies of. Geomancer is obviously one of them. Warrior of Light is a nice one to pick up if your guy has died or anything like that, because it means that you can keep going with it. Cecil is a nice one so that you can kind of reposition your decoys. There's a lot of things that Serafie can do, but I think that 2 copies in this deck is stronger than 3. It does keep you kind of 2 drops, down as well, so you kind of want to keep your difficulty curve at a certain level. And then also keeping that difficulty down is Delita, and this is one of my favourite cards in the game, and it does so much in this deck, actually. Given that we're running Evoker, you have a prime target to get killed by Delita if you kind of need room to play more backups or anything like that. Or you could use Geomancer, as I've said previously, because it draws you a card and it pluses for you, and he's just a massive guy. I've only gone with 2 because I don't think the S effect is all that important in this deck. I mean, you could up it to 3 if you wanted to, if you're particularly scared of Prish, but this is meant to be a budget deck, so at the end of the day, if someone else is building a budget deck, the chances are you're probably not going to come across Prish very often. And then I've gone with 2 copies of Monk because, yet again, it's something that can be boosted by Warrior of Light, and it's something that's just on the curve. It's just very simple and very, very clean. And then 2 copies of Mystic. Now, I really like Mystic, and again, given that we're running 3 copies of Evoker and a lot of 2-drop backups, you can make this guy really scary really quickly, and he is also boosted by Warrior of Light. He doesn't need it as much as some of the others do. In fact, none of these guys really need it. Mime is good on his own, Geomancer's good on his own, Black Belt's fairly good on his own. Monk's the only one that really does kind of need Warrior of Light to be there. But Mystic gets a significant buff from him as well, because your opponent can't block your first striking attacker if they think that you're going to blow up some of your backups and make it a lot bigger than their guy. Like, you can get around Prishes with this guy, provided they don't have the S for it. And then I've rounded it up with a single copy of Gabranth, mainly because I think a single copy of Gabranth goes well in almost any Earth deck, unless you have a reason not to run it. It's just a good card, and late game he can steal a game for you. He's just really solid. Now, I am going to take a quick second to kind of talk about the first backup we have here, which is Tama. Now, I go on and on and on about how great Tama is, and that's because he's great. He's just friggin' great. And, when it gets to a point where you've got, like, just some of your standard units, and you attack with, say, a Black Belt, and they block with something that's 9k, and then you go, okay, in response, you just go, I'm going to kill my Tama, and flash in a Warrior of Light. Now my guy's 10k and has first strike after you've declared blocker, but before the damage is dealt, then it's just like, I can't. It's too good. I love it. I love just destroying massive guys with something that really has no right to be killing anything, and it's just great fun. And then Kimari, I've opted for 2 copies of him, mainly because I think that a lot of people are playing water, at least in our meta. I'm going to do a video kind of highlighting the differences between the Western meta and the Eastern meta, because I think they're vastly different, and I'm really intrigued to see what everybody thinks of that. But Kimari in this deck kind of fills in the slot that Cosmos and Chaos would have had, and honestly, I almost prefer Kimari to those 2, because, it's something you can discard to other things, and because there's more Earth in this deck than Water, then it kind of makes sense. So, having him be able to, dull for Water crystals as well as Earth ones is just a nice bonus, really. And then 2 copies of Mustadio, because I really like Mustadio. I think he's really strong, and he's kind of, yes, he's one of the few things in this deck that can be targeted by Hecatoncheir, but if he's getting targeted by Hecatoncheir, that's fine, because it means you have room to play another one, and that's a good thing. It's more removal and EX burst. There's lots of reasons to run Mustadio. He's just a really solid backup, and luckily, he's only a rare / uncommon, however you want to call it. And then I've gone with 1 Evoker on this one. I've already gone over how Evokers work in this deck. And then I've also gone for a single copy of Enecro, because I think, similarly to Wakka, boosting up all of your guys by 1,000 in this particular deck is pretty strong. I normally only like running the boosters if I'm running Maria as well, because it means that half your guys are getting an extra 2k buff. But in this deck, I think the extra 1, goes the long distance. while I'm running 3 Hecaton Kia because every deck that runs Earth should run Hecaton Kia, I think that even decks could splash Earth for Hecaton Kia. I think the card's just amazing and extremely important. And luckily, like I said, this deck doesn't suffer very hard from it, but a lot of decks do, particularly ones who have more rares than you. You know, this deck is made so that people who are on a budget or anything like that can, you could literally build this deck out of someone else's discarded commons and uncommons. You know, I've built it myself, I've tried it, and genuinely it beats decks that it has absolutely no right to be beating. But I've also decided to go with a single copy of Titan because I think, you know, it's actually a pretty good card when you look at it as in a different way to the way it reads. It's, you know, having your guy not be able to be destroyed that turn means that if your opponent plays an Odin, for example, let's say your opponent really wants rid of your Gabranth, and they pay 7 into an Odin to kill it, and you go 2, my Gabranth doesn't die, your opponent has committed a lot more resources into killing your Gabranth than you spent saving it. So there's a lot of really good reasons to run this card. I'll only run one of it though because it isn't an EX burst and that bothers me slightly. He is really good at saving Warrior of Light though, so if you want to kind of gear this towards Warrior of Light even more, you probably could do by adding in more Titans. As I said before, this deck is designed for people who don't necessarily have access to a lot of boosters, because at the minute, not many of us do, because Final Fantasy TCG has sold out pretty much everywhere it's being sold, and that's a really good thing for the game. However, obviously we're hoping that they reprint it as soon as possible, and, you know, they get kind of the supply and demand thing right as soon as possible as well. But as I said, this deck could be built out of the discarded commons and uncommons from a friend who's bought a box or something like that. It's so easy to build, and it's equally easy to play as well. Your goal is to have just bigger guys than your opponent, whether it's through Warrior of Light, through Delita, through Gabranth, through Mystic. There's just loads of little plays that you can make that you don't require to have loads of expensive cards to make this, and it's a really, really cool deck to play. So, I mean, I kind of thought about even making up like a pauper format because I think it'd be really cool, especially while, you know, there aren't so many cards around at the moment. Having access to so many commons and uncommons that people would just give you. I mean, I know I would. If I knew someone was trying to get into the game, I would just build them this deck. And then that way they have something to play that doesn't infringe on anything that I'm playing or anything my friends are playing, and it means that I can get more players into this game, which is what we should be doing. Anyways, I'm going to love you and leave you there, and thank you very much for watching, and I hope that you test out this deck and see what you think. Leave a comment in the comments below if you like the deck, if you dislike the deck, and also if you want to discuss anything with me, you can join up with me on the Final Fantasy TCG fans page on Facebook, which I'll leave a link to in the description box, and I'm also going to leave a link to 6 Ages Gaming's channel, which I'll also leave in the description box because they've also done some really, really cool budget builds and some other really, really good content for Final Fantasy TCG, and I'm actually, you know, happy to support them because they've done a really good job. So yes, thanks again for watching, and hopefully I'll see you guys soon. Bye now.